Hello GenX TikTok, this is GenX Mystic here, and I want to share a few thoughts with you I've had just over the last 24 hours on the political system and problems that we're facing these days, but particularly a system which has led us to great division and increasing polarization in society, and just a general madness. So for those of you that may not be that interested in longer talks, obviously just go to the comments and do the GenX things, and have a listen to my dulcet tones while you do that, and hopefully you'll pick up some more followers along the way. I really don't know how to start this. This is probably going to be cut into several parts, but obviously, like a lot of people, I've been looking at the state of the world for quite a while, as Gen Xers do, and just wondering how the hell, on a practical level, do we overcome the incredible destruction we're seeing around us from a political perspective. Now, I've got to say, first of all, I'm not really a political animal. I'm certainly interested in geopolitics, but I'm really a spiritual sort of guy, and I lean towards the arts, and I have little to no formal education with regards to politics. Quite frankly, politics has generally bored me a lot, and I suppose that's mostly because of the way the system is. It's just like, what is the point of participating, voting, when nothing ever changes and everything gets worse subsequently with every election that goes along? It doesn't seem to matter what country you're in these days, the same problems are cropping up. And why is that? I mean, people have sort of said to me, Frog, if you don't vote, you've got nothing to complain about. And I sort of think that is the weirdest counter argument I've ever heard to not voting. It almost sort of suggests that by voting you gain the right to complain. Is that the best we can do? So by voting you don't gain a guarantee that public officials will act in your interests, or at least collectively take on board through voting your general interests. No, it doesn't guarantee that the economy will be stable, or that your pensions will be fine, or that the food won't be poisoned, or the air won't be fit to breathe. No, you're expected to vote by this argument because you're fighting for the right to complain. Well, I can complain without voting, thank you very much. So what's the problem here? And I'd sort of thought previously, thinking about politics, I thought, well, the problem is that there's no accountability that's in the system that holds the politicians to account. You've got these people who represent the will of the people through voting, and they're expected on trust to carry out the wishes of the people. And the people vote once every 4 years, or depending on however long it is, and expect and trust these politicians to carry out their will for every day of their waking lives until they next vote. It's like that's a lot of trust to put into an individual or an organization who is taking upon itself the interests of everybody, every citizen who's participating in a democracy. It's really strange. And there's a power imbalance there, because if they don't, then they can just sort of use whatever words or excuses, or perhaps go through a kind of a sort of performative, lessons have been learned, but we're putting in new guidelines, it was a terrible thing. It's all lipstick, it's all sort of just placating people, but there's no real accountability, and we see that over and over again. And yet at the same time, what's really interesting is that we've got these new systems which are being wonderfully offered to the public, which will solve all the problems, which will make life much simpler and cheaper to live, And if you just do it this way, if you get your digital ID, if you sign up to the World Health Organization, which is full of people that you've never elected, then everything will be sorted and everything will be fine. And yet the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? If we really look around ourselves at the way the consequences of government policy just in the last 2 decades, it's just astonishing. We've been taken to illegal wars. Nobody's been held account. You know, we've paid with our taxpayers' money for all these services, and yet increasingly just ended up with crappier and crappier services. How can that possibly be? How can the system be selling you a solution which at the same time has been a system which has consistently lied and led people down the garden path? It's like a sort of compulsive liar who's saying to you, oh, you trust me just this one time, you know? It's like the emperor's new clothes at this point, and everybody can see it. It doesn't actually matter whether you're on the left or the right. You can see that things are fundamentally breaking down. And yet at the same time, this solution which is being offered is going to monitor on a granular level every citizen that the system applies itself to. And it's going to be taxing and watching what you eat and watching what you say and watching where you move. It's going to require complete transparency of the individual to participate in this system. And the interesting thing is, you know, if you said to the government, the democracy that you're part of, well, you know, there are particular things that I'd like to have addressed here before I cast my vote, and I want to know that those things are going to be carried through. And you know, you'll have a response as well. That's impractical. We can't sort of monitor everybody's wishes. We can't have a vote on everybody's interests that we're dealing with on every piece of legislation that's being written out. It's just impractical. It's not cost effective. It's not efficient for a government to act that way. And yet at the same time, we're being sold an idea that the government and governmental systems, those that we allegedly elect, have this wonderful solution to simplifying everything, which is going to make life so much better. Well, how does that work out? Because really what they're saying is that their infrastructure works for billions of people, but it wouldn't work for the small few group of people who are in government. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, what they're saying is that the infrastructure is there. You know, on my journey just recently, I was looking back through how democracy formed, and you had this character called Solon, who was a poet of all things, and he was a sort of prime mover in ancient Greece to bring about the first semblances of what we call democracy. And it was what we would now refer to as a direct democracy, in the sense that it wasn't everybody. There were certainly slaves who are part of that civilization, part of that culture, but at the same time the citizenry had a direct ability to interface with the government and direct and write policy and vote on it and what have you. It was the closest thing we would recognize in modern day to a referendum on everything. And I think the argument had been that, you know, small groups could function this way because it didn't require sort of having to sift through potentially millions and millions of people's opinions in order for the government to come to a decision on how it was going to legislate or whatever. And then as time moved on, our culture, that civilization moved into representative democracies. And representative democracies is what we often regard as normal when we use the word democracy. We have elected officials who carry out on behalf of the people the wishes of their wants and needs. And that's all put down to a single vote now, where you've got this enormous party and leaders who are being elected to tell everybody else what the decisions that are being made are, and yet they're human beings, they're corruptible, they're influenced by funding and special interests and what have you, and also they act with a degree of impunity, so there's very little guarantee that whatever you've asked for or what other people have asked for has going to have any little sway once these people are in office. And I'd say this is probably why populism is such a maligned term by those in power these days, because populism is where I think people are identifying collectively that certain individuals are not playing along necessarily with this deceptive game. So, I also ran across this point that governments inevitably become tyrannical. So I think, well, why is that and how is that? Well, it's obviously because they just accrue more and more power over the course of time, and people have less and less power. And it's no surprise that people feel so disaffected in this current situation, because we've learned over the course of time that voting makes no bloody difference whatsoever. In fact, there's that old term, if voting made any difference, they'd make it illegal. But the thing is that we're conflating our idea of democracy often with what we've come to know as democracy, which is actually representational democracy, where we're putting our trust as the people into the hands of some sort of external individual who's going to carry out the wishes of the people on trust. So on my journey, I thought, well, ideally we need to have everybody as involved with decision making and effectively collating referendums as easily as they do click likes or comments on TikTok or X or whatever. So we've got actually the infrastructure there, and it doesn't have to be, it could be on a blockchain or something. So on one level, in my previous video I was talking about how this wonderful economic system that they're trying to bring in, it can be easily test run on them. Let them demonstrate by us monitoring the system that they're creating, by having the system applied to themselves. But if we're going to go further than that, let's presume they're not going to go with that. Let's presume those in power are making this system that they've got up and running not for them. It's for you. And so suggesting to them that they should take on board this system is not going to happen. So the problem is we need to shift the balance of power away from those who've coalesced it and more into the people's hands. And the problem with that imbalance of power is that when it gets to this sort of point, it clearly demonstrates that it exacerbates division. It creates more polarity between people. It's creating a two-class system. In fact, I was thinking, in some ways, it's producing a mentality the structure that we carry about in our heads about the world, the way it works, of a master and servant. And it's kind of condoning people to act in a manner where they're sort of performing through this lens of, well, there are masters and servants, so if I act like a master, you have to become a servant. And I won't like it if you act like a master because I want to be the master, you know. So there's this sort of pushing and shoving that starts happening. And, you know, people are different, and they're never always going to agree. We know that much, and that's fine. But we need to have a way of interfacing with those who make the rules that we can trust and feel like we genuinely, as people, got some sort of relevance to the structure, the political structure and organizations that we are paying taxes to and expecting a service back from. So, direct democracy, a pure direct democracy, would be where everybody has a say in every piece of legislation that's going on. And that's obviously going to be a real challenge, no matter how practical current technology has made things. But we can start moving in that direction. The answer is really actually quite simple. It's not about necessarily reforming the democracy that we've got, or the structure of democracy that we've got. It's actually going back to having more democracy. And that is my revelation of the last sort of week or so, particularly in the last 24 hours, that even though ultimately I'm really interested in spiritual things, direct democracy is the answer. It's really that simple. And if we can't have direct democracy, then we can demand that the exact level of granular interest that the government has in the people is effectively reversed or played out equally among those in power. And the great thing about the World Economic Forum and the digital bank currencies and all these things that they're trying to sort of insert into people's lives is that it demonstrates that the infrastructure is there. So we can take that positive from it. We just need to change the infrastructure towards direct democracy. I think in the long run, you know, it could be a transitional point where you have sort of constitution and direct democracy, and progressively over time, you're allowing people to take more and more power back upon themselves. So for themselves, and taking the power away from the politicians. And you know, it's really interesting that direct democracy has been discussed for a long time. I was just sort of new to it as a result of my thinking. But isn't it interesting that it's not a discussion it's not a topic which is sort of brought about. It's not a topic that people talk about sort of normally. We sort of rub our hands wondering, oh, you know, why are things so terrible? We need to do this, or we need to get this politician in, or we need to get this party in to sort of right the wrongs of the last party. And the longer it goes on, the more divided people become. But that's because the power has just become so lopsided between people and the government that we put the cart before the horse. So we need to move towards direct democracy. Anyway, there you go. That's 20 minutes of me rambling away on something that I don't know how many people will find interesting. But they're just my thoughts, and I welcome any comments below if you've got this far. Sorry it's not really a mystical, spiritual talk this time, but it's part of my exercise to sort of share with people what's going through my head. And if I haven't made anything clear, I apologise. sort of my head's going in multiple different directions, thinking about direct democracy. Yeah, I'll probably do some more talks on it later on, but for now, thanks for getting to the end of this and listening, and yeah, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and thank you for existing. Bye bye.